You're sitting inside a small tent. The air is hot and close. Someone you loved died 3 days ago. In the middle of the tent, there's a pile of stones, glowing red. An old man reaches into a pouch. He throws a handful of plants onto the hot stones, and the tent fills with thick, sweet smoke. Everyone leans in. Everyone breathes, including you. A few minutes later, the grief goes soft at the edges. The walls of the tent seem to move when you move. This is 2,500 years ago. This is a funeral. And this is some of the oldest solid evidence we have of human beings getting high on purpose. Not at a party, not to relax after work, at a funeral. Because here's the thing almost nobody tells you. The first people we can prove got high were doing it to reach the dead. To understand how we got here, forget the smoke for a second. Because for most of its history with us, this plant had nothing to do with getting high. Cannabis is one of the oldest plants humans ever farmed. Way back in ancient East Asia, people grew it everywhere. Scientists think it first grew wild somewhere in Central Asia, up near the high plateaus, and from there, it followed people out into the world. But not for the reason you'd think. They grew it for rope, for nets, for cloth. The stalk makes a strong, tough fiber. They grew it for the seeds too, which you can eat. So for thousands of years, this was a hardware store, not a drug. It made your clothes, it made your fishing line, it fed you. Whole villages depended on it, and nobody was getting high. In fact, this was one of the very first plants we ever bothered to grow. Some of the oldest scraps of rope and cloth ever found were made from it, and as people spread out across the continent, the plant traveled with them, over mountains, across endless grasslands. Wherever humans walked, they carried its seeds, which is the strange part. The plant had a secret the whole time. Because there are really two sides to cannabis. One grows tall and stringy, and it's all about that useful fiber. The other grows low and sticky, and it's loaded with strange chemicals. Chemicals that do something to the human mind. For thousands of years, people only seem to care about the rope. Some of these plants, if you burned them and breathed the smoke, could reach into your head and change everything. And at some point, somewhere, a human being found that out. So here's the real mystery. It isn't when we found the plant. We'd had it in our hands for ages. The mystery is when someone first looked at it and wanted the smoke. Because that one choice changed everything that came after. The question is where and when. And the answer is stranger than you would guess. Go to a desert in the far west of China. There's a burial ground there, thousands of years old. The air is so dry that things don't rot. They just wait. Skin, hair, clothing, even food can survive out here for thousands of years. It's one of the few places on Earth where the ancient dead still look almost asleep. Archaeologists opened one of the graves. Inside was a man, middle-aged, buried with care, and laid over his body, like a blanket, was almost 2 pounds of cannabis. Not a few stray seeds, whole plants, arranged on top of him on purpose. Some of it had been packed into a wooden bowl in a basket, set right beside his head, and these plants still had their flowering tops, the part that carries the most punch. Whoever prepared this body knew exactly which parts mattered. This was around 2,700 years ago, and when the plants were tested, they weren't the rope kind. They were a kind that carried the chemicals that get you high. Someone chose this plant, on purpose, for its power, and they decided this man needed to take it with him, wherever he was going. People buried near him seemed to have been special in their community, the kind of people who talked to the spirit world. In their world, a person like that was a bridge, a link between the living and whatever waited on the other side. So already, the pattern is showing up. This isn't a stash hidden under a teenager's bed. It's a gift for the dead. But a pile of plants in a grave still doesn't prove one thing. It doesn't prove anyone actually breathed the smoke. For that, we need to go up, way up. High in the Pamir Mountains, there's another cemetery. This one sits thousands of feet up, in thin, cold air, about 2,500 years old. And in the graves, archaeologists found small wooden bowls, braziers, full of stones burned black. Somebody had heated these stones in a fire, then carried them, glowing into the burial. And when the residue on those stones was tested, it told an incredible story. It was cannabis, burned, but not ordinary cannabis. The chemistry showed it was unusually strong, stronger than the wild plants that grew nearby. There were 10 of these braziers in the cemetery, and one grave held something else, a kind of angular harp, which means there may have been music playing as the smoke rose. And the people buried up here hadn't all come from the same place. Some had traveled from far away to end up on this mountain, which means these people weren't just grabbing whatever was around. They knew. They had learned which plants hit harder, and they were choosing them on purpose for a funeral on a freezing mountaintop. Picture the scene, the cold, the height, the grave open in the rock, hot stones carried in, the plants thrown on, the smoke rising in the thin mountain air, and the living breathing it in to sit for a while with the dead. This is about as close as archaeology ever gets to a smoking gun. And here's what makes it even better. Someone from the outside world saw people doing this, and he wrote it down. Around the same time, an ancient Greek historian was traveling and collecting stories. He wrote about a people who lived on the great grasslands to the north, fierce horse riders, hard to miss, and he described something they did that clearly baffled him. After someone died, they'd set up a small tent, they'd put hot stones inside, then they'd throw cannabis onto the stones, and they would sit in the smoke and howl with joy. He said they did this after burying their dead. A whole group, packed inside the little felt tent, breathing the smoke together until they cried out loud. He even said it worked like a bath for them. They came out of the smoke cleansed and shouting with pleasure. He thought it was a kind of cleansing, a way to mourn. He wrote it down as a strange foreign custom. He had no idea he was describing one of the oldest habits on Earth, and for a long time, people thought maybe he made it up. Until archaeologists dug into the frozen tombs of those same grasslands and found the tents, the stones, the braziers, the cannabis seeds, right where he said they'd be. One of those icy graves still held a little tent frame, a pile of stones, and a pouch of cannabis seeds, frozen and preserved for 2,500 years. He wasn't exaggerating. He was reporting the news. So now look at what we've got. A desert grave, a mountain cemetery, a funeral tent on the plains, 3 different places, 3 different peoples, and the same behavior, over and over. And it wasn't only buried with the dead, it was written down, too. In ancient China, some of the oldest medical books ever made describe this plant. They call it powerful medicine, but they add a strange warning. Take too much, one text says, and you will start to see ghosts. Use it long enough, it says, and you can send messages to the spirits. Read that again. The oldest writing we have about cannabis doesn't treat the visions as a problem. It treats them as the whole point, a way to reach the other side. Which forces the real question. Why is it always death? Here's the thing about the earliest evidence. It is almost never about having a good time. It's about graves, funerals, sitting with the dead. And there's a reason for that, if you think like these people did. To them, the smoke wasn't a way to switch off. It was a way to travel. When you're high, the ordinary world loosens its grip. Voices feel closer. The dead feel closer. The line between here and somewhere else gets thin. And that wasn't a bug to these people. That was the entire reason to do it. So if you wanted to speak to someone you just lost, if you wanted to reach the spirits or the gods, this was the technology that got you there. Not a drug, a door. Remember that old medical book? Send messages to the spirits. These people weren't confused about what the smoke was doing. They were using it for exactly what they believed it was for. This doesn't prove nobody ever got high just for fun. People almost certainly did. But think about what survives. A funeral leaves a grave, and a grave leaves clues that last thousands of years. A good time around a fire leaves nothing, so the record we can actually dig up leans hard toward the sacred. The first highs we can prove were serious, and that idea proved almost impossible to kill. Long after these graves were sealed, people were still burning plants in temples, still breathing smoke to feel closer to something greater than themselves. The tools changed, the reason barely did. So when did ancient humans start getting high? For thousands of years, this plant was just rope and food. Then, around 2,700 years ago, someone was buried in a desert under a blanket of it. 2,500 years ago, people carried burning stones up a mountain to breathe its smoke over the dead. And out on the grasslands, mourners sat in the smoke and howled at the sky. The same idea, again and again, that this plant could open a door. We think of getting high as new, as modern, as a little bit rebellious, but it's ancient. And at the very beginning, it wasn't an escape from life. It was how the living said goodbye.